Our next speaker is going to be O.T. Bonnett. It's Dr. Bonnett, and he was a doctor for, was it 40 years or 44? 44 years. He was a medical doctor. He did everything. He even ran a hospital for a while, weren't you? In charge of a hospital? He'll give you his background. But he did everything. But even from the beginning, he was not really conventional. He kept trying to sneak in these other ideas, he said, without the other doctors knowing what you were doing. And the idea of the mind being able to heal the body and how past lives could have a part in it. But he had to do it in a way that they wouldn't find out. And you had in trouble several times, too, didn't you? But he's going to be doing 2 talks, one today on his use of hypnosis with the past lives, that's part of it, isn't it? Reincarnation with the medical practice. And tomorrow he's going to be talking about how he tried to show people you can heal your body with your mind and try to introduce that into the medical profession ahead of his time. But I think we're headed that way. That's hopefully anyway. And we have published 3 of his books. The first one was Reincarnation, The View from Eternity, and the other 2 just came out. And the one just came off the press this week. We were really sweating it out. The one is What I Learned After Medical School and Why Healing Happens. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Before you start, I want to just tell that little story of how we met, which is definitely metaphysical, and we can still not explain it yet to this day. O.T. had been looking for a publisher, but you know how everybody is. It's very hard to find. 7 years. But it took me 9 years to get my first book published, so I know what you mean. Well, after I got my first one, it turned out to be a rat, but that's another story. But anyway, he sent us his manuscript, and we liked it, and we decided to publish it. And then he asked me, how did you get my name and address? And what happened, we had sent out catalogs to our mailing list. We have about 10,000 mailing lists, and we sent out the catalogs to everybody. He said, I got your catalog. I decided, well, I'll submit my book to this company. But he said, how did you get my name and address? I said, well, it comes off of our list from my people that write us, the fans. And every time we do a show, we have a notebook out for people to sign to get on our mailing list. But he said, I've never heard of you. I don't know anything about your work. I've never been at anything you've done. How did you get my name? Now, the strange thing about it is, we looked it up on our mailing list. It says Orville Bonnett. He never uses his first name. He hates it. That's why he says O.T. And he said the only time you've ever even heard the name Orville is when his guides are trying to get his attention. His guides are the only one that use the name Orville. Now, how did that get into our computer as Orville Bonnett, unless they had something to do with it? But it's unexplained, but it started a good relationship here, and apparently they wanted you to do it. And his guides, whenever he's in medical profession and they get upset with him or want to get his attention, they always yell at him, Orville. So he knows that his guides had something to do with it. We still can't explain it, but at least it was a reason.
I'm going to add a little bit to that. I finally gave up trying to get a publisher after writing maybe 75 different publishers and got no response. So I said to the universe, if you want this book published, you're going to have to figure out some way to do it. Well, after I got the catalog, I found out that my deceased father intervened. He called me Orville. And using some other entities, of I don't know who, they got onto the telephone line and got into Dolores's computer and wrote my name and address into her mailing list. And that was it. In about 1967, Anthony Quinn got an Oscar for the movie Zorba the Greek. And I'm sure most of you have seen the movie or maybe even read the book. And toward the end of the movie, the Englishman announces to Zorba that he's getting ready to return to England. And Zorba was very upset, and finally he said, "Boss, I love you too much not to say it. Boss, you've got it all, except for one little thing, that little bit of madness that allows you to cut the rope and set yourself free." And after a little bit, the Englishman said, "Will you teach me to dance?" So here we are in a room full of good-looking people, all of whom had that bit of madness to cut the rope and set yourself free. And we all need to learn to dance and cry when it's appropriate. Now, my perception of the universe is a bit different than Father Bob. No, I just choke up with that. My perception is that the universe is God. God did not create the universe. He is the universe. And the universe is made up of intelligent consciousness, period. Now, the consciousness is set as small units or packets of consciousness. It has no weight. It commands no space. Sort of like a point in geometry. It is. But these consciousness units have certain qualities that make them alive. They are, number one, they're indeed conscious. They are aware, which is a bit more than just being conscious. It's like waking up in a motel and you forget where you are. And you're conscious, but you're not aware of where you are for a few minutes. So you're conscious, aware. They have the ability to communicate. They have memory. They have intent or purpose. They're infinitely creative, and they're precognitive. And everything in the universe is made up of these consciousness units. And there are untold thousands or millions in every electron, in every thought. Everything is made up of consciousness units. And only about 6 or 7% of the consciousness is taken up by the physical representation of a thing. Sort of like the tip of the iceberg that sticks up. It's all you see, but the mass of it down below. It's been said that if the consciousness of a single cell took up space, it would command this expanse the size of the world. Now, when you were created by God, what was created was your Oversoul. And this entity is nurtured by vaster entities, and you have learned a lot of things. You are taught about the rules and regulations that the universe is supposed to follow, but you're endowed with free will. And if or when you decide you want to undergo a biologic incarnation here on earth, your Oversoul sends splinters of itself into this dimension in what can be determined the past, the present, and the future. Because all these things are taking place at the same time. You know, time doesn't really exist in the universe. It's relative. So each of your incarnations are going on now, but you're not aware of it. And we come here for specific reasons. It's to learn certain things. And people choose and want to learn various things. So something is set up which will guide you into selecting the parents who will best augment that learning situation. somebody said, well, why would I want to incarnate in a dying child in Ethiopia that's starving to death? Well, if it's your purpose to learn about starvation so that in another incarnation you will be better able to help the starving millions, that may well be the incarnation you choose. What better way to learn about starvation than to experience it? I had a little girl in my practice who was an achondroplastic dwarf. She was extremely bright, beautiful girl, and she said to me one day, Dr. Bonnett, why me? Well, I knew that what she was doing was getting a learning experience, because in a subsequent incarnation, she planned to be a therapist working with mentally retarded and crippled children. So her experience as the achondroplastic dwarf would give her a lot of insight as to what these other children are going to go through. And I told her, I said, well, it's an opportunity. It's a gift, Rita. And I said, just continue being the intelligent, sweet, loving person that you are now. And she died when she was about 32. And she'd learned and come what she wanted to do, and she'd achieved her goal. So it was time to check out and go on to another. Another example of the lessons that, incidentally, I wrote Julia and Dolores what I wanted to talk about, and they said fine, and then they added a lot of stuff. But I had a patient come to me, and she had read my book about reincarnation, and so she tried self-hypnosis and remembered a life in which she was a wife of an oil field worker, and she was in her 30s, and she had a little 12-year-old girl and an older son that was working in the oil field, and they were living in a house near the storage tanks, and the tanks blew up, and she and her 12-year-old daughter were burned to death. And she was just found herself up in front of the old ones, complaining bitterly that this was totally unfair. So she came to me and asked me if I'd hypnotize her and see if her self-hypnosis had been valid. So I did, and she learned that they'd given her about 32, 35 years to do what she was supposed to do, and that her daughter was just sort of filling in time, waiting for the setup for her next incarnation. It was very important. So the 12 years was all, took care of that time span, so she happily died and went on to her next incarnation. So she wanted some more hypnosis, so I hypnotized her, and the moment she got into a good trance, she said, oh, I'm so beautiful, and I have all these gorgeous gowns and slippers. Turned out she was the wife of a Maharaja in India. And she said, I'm his favorite. And I said, whose favorite? She said, the Maharaja. And her son, 2 sons, became the first minister and the Maharaja when her husband died. And when she died, she was remembering her funeral, and tears were streaming down her face, and the mascara was running, and she said, telling me about this wonderful funeral pyre that she was cremated on. And she said, I deserve this glory because I was such a wonderful mother. And then she said, and my brother and sister in this life were my sons in the other life. I'm glad we're having another incarnation together. So I said, well, do you want to come out of hypnosis? No, I want the one by the sea and the sand. So I said, okay. So she was a little girl in Greece living with her grandparents, and they had some goats and they fished, and she said, and then that Turk came, that terrible Turk. Well, apparently there was a war with Turkey, and this Turkish soldier killed her grandfather, then he raped and tortured her grandmother to death. And I said, and what did he do to you? Well, nothing. He left me alone. He just slaughtered my goats and smeared their blood all over me. And I said, and then what happened? And she said, Well, I spent the rest of my life doing penance, wearing black, working in the church. I said, what are you doing penance for? Well, she said, if you must know, I'm doing penance for what I did to the Turk in the last life. And I said, oh, you've known each other before? And she said, oh, yeah, about 20 lifetimes. And I said, well, when did it start? She said, well, we were cavemen. She said, we didn't even have an oral language. We communicated with telepathy and gestures. And she said, I said, what'd you fight about? Well, we fought about which females we were going to breed. And she said, once I was a Mexican girl getting water from the well, and he was a bandit, and he rode into the village and shot me dead. And then she said, and once I was a knight in Cromwell's army, and I got him right through the chest with my lance. And I said, oh, come on. You were in the thick of a battle. You didn't even know who he was. She said, our spirits knew. And she said, and he's my husband in this life. So I said, oh, how did that happen? She said, well, we weren't even in love with each other when we got married. And she said, I thought, I got to be crazy to marry this guy because they fought all the time. And she said, now I know that we responded to some very stern cosmic advice that we were to marry and get along. And she said, I'm going to see to it that we're compatible. And that's the only reason for this incarnation, is to settle this ancient feud. So other lives constantly play into these. We're just usually not aware of it. Now, when you're finished with what you came to learn or to do, or you never will complete it because of inappropriate choices that you make, there's nothing left to do but to die and start again. And so this happens. We arrange to have our bodies die. And I learned a long time ago that nobody dies from any reason whatsoever that doesn't choose to do so or agree to it. Nobody dies a minute before you want to. So all this junk about not smoking, and I used to bang the drum and tell my patients not to smoke, you're not going to die till you want to anyway, so you might as well enjoy your cigarettes. Now, smoking may interfere with the quality of your life, but you won't die before you're ready to. And I talked to my friend who was teaching me this, and I said, now, hypothetically, what if I have a female patient and I don't do pap smears on her? And subsequently it's found that she has an advanced carcinoma of the cervix. If I'd done pap smears, we could have caught this when it was curable by a hysterectomy. He says, it doesn't make any difference. I said, well, wouldn't I have been responsible for her dying early? Then no. He said, she died when she wanted to die. He said, if she didn't get cancer of the cervix, she would have had to find something else to check out. So the speed limits being reduced to 55 years ago didn't save any lives. And I argued with my friend, and I said, and I got out a book of statistics, and I said, look, Ralph, look at the big drop in traffic fatalities during those years. He said, yeah, O.T., but look at the bottom line, at total deaths during those, it hadn't changed. So you look through, and there were a few more deaths due to heart disease and more to home accidents, and a few more people got shot by jealous lovers and whatever. And gasoline consumption may have gone down, but not deaths. People just chose some other way to exit. Now, upon the death of our bodies, our souls detach, and that splinter, O.T. Bonnett, will return to my Oversoul. if I've been a halfway decent guy, my spirit will be accepted and it will be incorporated into the Oversoul. Now, if I've been a Saddam Hussein or a Jeffrey Dahmer or a Adolf Hitler, I die and I go back there. My Oversoul doesn't accept me. Doesn't have to. It's up to the Oversoul. So that splinter has to reincarnate again and again, facing the same challenges until it gets it right. And then, after living one life in which it handles it well, it dies, it can be accepted by the Oversoul. So when we talk about reincarnation, we're not talking about reincarnation. We got the wrong word. What we're talking about is the multiple incarnations of our Oversoul, all of these splinters. And because we're really not separate from the Oversoul, when I get hypnotized or do reading and remember my life as an Apache Indian or the sculptor Luca della Robbia in Italy, these weren't me. It seems like it was me, but actually those are other splinters of my common Oversoul. So we still continue to use the term, but it really isn't accurate because I'm sure nobody here is going to not be accepted back. I don't see any mass rapists or murderers out there. That, at least if there are, you're hiding it real well. And so that's about 6% of the people do not return to the Oversoul right away. They have to reincarnate over and over. Incidentally, if somebody's got a question that is so burning that you're not paying attention, ask it now and we'll get it out of the way. Don't be afraid to interrupt me if you want. Just stand up and start hollering. Now, the lives of other incarnations of our Oversoul affect us in many ways. In prejudice we come in with, beliefs, illnesses. It was my watch. I had an incarnation as an Apache Indian. And I was what would be termed a renegade. And I was bound and determined I was going to keep all the white people out of Arizona and New Mexico. So, you got a question? Okay, well, you're holding your hands. Okay. So I would go into a camp at night and slit everybody's throat but one and disembowel them and let the remaining individual wake up to find his companions all dead. And the idea was that he'd run back to where he came from and say, "Don't go there, that's dangerous." Well, it didn't work. And I didn't enjoy the killing, but I was fighting a war. And the soldiers caught me and shot me through the chest. Didn't kill me, but they knocked me down and they came up and found me and held my right hand, because my favorite weapon was a Bowie knife, down against a boulder and used the butts of the rifles to smash my hand and wrist. And then they smashed my face in and thought they'd killed me. But one of Geronimo's band found me and carried me back to Geronimo's camp. Incidentally, Geronimo was a sweetie pie. Everybody loved him. The kids loved him. He had a nice sense of humor. He was just one hell of a soldier. So he was fighting his battle the only way he knew how. So they nursed me back to life, but I was left with a crippled hand. And so I decided to commit suicide by army. And I ran into an ambush where they'd set for me. And I could have killed most of them where they hid and got away, but I just ran into it and let them shoot me down. And the bullet hit me right here and went into my brain. And then they came running out, hollering for joy that they finally got him. And they kicked my body and they shot into it, and one unlisted man unbuttoned his pants and urinated in my face, and then they left me. And this other guy came and got me. Oh, but when I was shot, I was killed. I'm sorry. In this incarnation, I have no sense of smell. I have what's called a vertical phoria. Instead of diverging, one eye is focused a tad higher than the other, so that when my vision gets tired, I see a vertical double vision. It was interesting when I was driving my car at night. One road would be here, the other was going up into the... and I knew that I was starting to fall asleep. But that was a carryover from these injuries that I received as an Apache. And I could go on and on. I know of a guy who was horribly abusive to his children and his wife under hypnosis. He'd done the same thing in a life in Egypt. And he was totally convinced that this was appropriate and it was his right to do so. So he carries this attitude toward women and kids over into this life. And he'll continue to do that until somebody straightens him out. And this is part of the learning process. Now, just because you die and go through your debriefing doesn't mean that you're going to pay attention or listen or obey. So you can get all the good advice you want and still thumb your nose at it and say, no, it's my right, and I'm going to continue thinking like I do. So that's the beauty or the downside of having a free will. Now, once we die, once our body dies, because we don't die, people don't even lose consciousness. And they may be aware of a little confusion. I hypnotized one man who was killed on the landing on Saipan. And he didn't know he was dead. And he kept running up and down the beach trying to find some officers who would listen to him, because he wanted to tell him that his Marine unit was receiving heavy fire. And they didn't pay attention to him, and he assumed that was because they were real busy. So he ran back to his unit and and the first time he realized he was dead is when he ran through a pine tree, or a coconut tree. And he turned around, he looked, and he went back and ran through it again. He thought, what matter? But he still didn't believe it till he found his body. And his head was nearly blown off. But it was then that he realized it and accepted the fact he was dead. So once we go back, or we go through the tunnel, or whatever it may be, and it varies to some degree, depending on your belief system, you go through a debriefing. And you go before a committee of several ancient entities, and you go through this debriefing, and you can't hide behind extenuating circumstances. You have to admit to what you did. And it isn't fault-finding, but nearly everybody is filled with remorse for the petty things that they've done. And after that is over, which between our way we measure time, it may be a few weeks, a few months, or many years, depending on how much you have to integrate, because you're integrating the experiences of this life with the experiences of all your other incarnations in this dimension and other dimensions where you may have been incarnated as a robot or a sculpture or whatever. So you correlate all these things together. And then there are a number of things that you can do, and these aren't just my findings. You can go sit on the park bench and feed the celestial pigeons if you're not interested in dashing ahead and learning some more. You can go to schools. I had one patient talk about studying cosmic law, and I said, what did you learn? She said, oh, it's infinitely beautiful and just. And I said, what? She said, I can't put it into words, but it's just marvelous. I had a patient talk about studying medicine so that they could use this knowledge in their incarnation in which they were going to be a doctor. So there's endless scenarios that you can follow. Then you decide, along with your guides, what you're going to learn in your upcoming incarnation. And you sign off on the blueprint. Nobody's made to do anything. And you choose your parents. And your guides help find your parents. They're chosen on the basis of those individuals who best augment your new adventure. You might choose parents that are rigid and hateful. You might find them that are loving. My guides did a wonderful job because I had absolutely perfect parents. I cannot think of one single thing I would have had to do different. They were loving, they were supportive, great human beings, and I was fortunate. So and of course, when you choose your parents, you're choosing a lot of things that go along with that. You're choosing whether your social economic status, your religion, your race, all these things come along with choosing the parents. And I said, you pick out your next challenges that you have. Now, the universe is like an oversoul. My reading is that there are 7 universes. We're just one of the 7. And each universe has billions of incarnations. We call these galaxies. And the galaxies die just like we do through the mechanism of black holes. And in the center of every galaxy is a black hole. There are black holes in other places too, where the matter-G, that's a word I coined, between matter-G or matter and energy, where the matter-G is taken into the black hole and completely compressed, torn apart, and then it spills out the backside of the black hole in what the astronomers call quasars, or you might call it a white hole. And so the energy comes out again and it reforms another galaxy. Now, one of the things I did, I think I would have been doing hypnosis longer than you have, Dolores. I'm not sure. I learned about 1952. Okay. Any rate, I learned it from an old stage hypnotist. And he got legitimate and went around the country teaching doctors and dentists how to hypnotize people. And he'd have a series of 7 cities, and he'd go to each city every day and give a lesson, and then he'd be ready to go to the first city again, teach lesson number 2, and so forth. His name was Dave Ellman. And so he taught us a lot, and this was at the time when the book of Searching in Search of Bridie Murphy came out. So we asked Dave about this, and Dave hit the ceiling. He never heard such a bunch of junk in all his life. Idea of people being incarnated, and on and on and on and on. And at that time, it was a little bit unethical for a doctor to learn to do hypnosis. It was frowned upon. So I finally figured out that Dave didn't want to get embroiled in this other controversy, and that he knew all about it, but he just didn't want to talk about it. But I learned through him that a lot of things happen to us that I term bleed-through memories. Let's assume that you all go out here and stub your toe and fall down and smash your nose. So immediately your spirit, which is the same spirit that's part of your oversoul, thinks about all of the other experiences you've had in other incarnations in which you've had mashed noses. So if you recover quickly, you think, nah, no big deal, it'll be fine. If you had an experience in which your mashed nose didn't recover, that information is fed into your mind here, and your other symptoms will continue to give you symptoms in this life. I had a professor come running into me, and he'd stubbed his little toe and broken it. And he was absolutely in a panic. And I said, oh, it's no big deal. We'll just pull it. And I did. And I said, we'll tape it to your other toe, and it'll be fine. It'll be sore for a while and hurt when you walk, but no big deal. Well, are you sure that's all it is? I said, yeah. Are you positive? Yeah, really. So I taped his toe, and before he left, now, you sure there isn't anything more to it? I said, no. Well, he called me that afternoon to be reassured. And the next day, he came in out without an appointment. He wanted me to look at his toe and reassure him. And I thought, this is nuts. This has got to be another life experience. So I hypnotized him. And I said, did you ever hurt your toe before? Oh, yeah. I said, do you want to tell me about it? You don't have to experience the pain or just what happened. Well, he was a Viking warrior. And they were in a battle, and somebody swung the sword at him, missed mostly, but hit his foot and badly cut his little toe. And it got infected. He ended up getting gangrene, and he died. So the minute he broke his little toe, it reminded him of the other injury. And so he starts panicking. Naturally, if I'm going to die of gangrene from a broken toe, I want to know about it. So under hypnosis, I pointed this out to him, and he was okay. I said, you, it's another person. Another thing I learned to do under hypnosis is what I called an organ interview. And people go to the doctor and say they have some nondescript belly pain, and the doctor doesn't really know whether it's gallbladder or an ulcer or spastic colon or whatever. But under hypnosis, the patient can tell you. And I'd say to him, well, let's let you feel the feelings coming from your gallbladder. And I give him a cue. Well, it's okay. Well, how about your small bowel? Well, that's okay. And I say, well, your cold. Oh, yeah, that's where the trouble is. And then I go get an X-ray to prove it. And they were invariably correct. I had a professor of psychology who was a friend of mine and a patient, and Perry was fat, and he was powerfully built guy. He was built like a brick outhouse, but he had about 5 inches of fat on his belly. And he called me out to his house one Sunday morning. He said, "O.T., I got a bellyache. I don't know what it is." Well, I examined him, and with all that fat, I really couldn't tell what I was feeling, but he was tender. And he said, "Do one of those organ interviews with me." So I hypnotized him, and I said, well, you probably won't feel much because you haven't eaten breakfast this morning, but let's let you feel your stomach. And he said, oh, it's full of food. He said, it must have been what I ate last night. He said, I haven't had anything to eat today. And he said, it's just laying there. So I said, well, let's let you feel the feelings coming from your appendix. Huh? He said, that's okay. So I said, well, let's feel the feelings coming from the last foot or so of your small bowel and the first part of your colon. He said, oh, that's where the pain is. So I took him into the hospital, and he had a white count of like 20,000, and it's pretty obvious he had appendicitis. So I got a friend who happened to be an OB-GYN man. This was on Sunday, and George liked to assist me anyway. And so just as we were we were finished scrubbing and we were draping Perry, why George got a call from the delivery room. He had a woman in crowning. So I said, go ahead, deliver your baby, and I'll open his belly with the nurse. So I had trouble, and with all this fat, it soaks up anesthesia like a sponge. So we had trouble getting him relaxed, and I got his cecum out, and there was a big stumpy appendix about like my thumb, very inflamed, and I took it off and inverted it, and about that time, George came back. He said, "Do you need me?" I said, "Yeah, scrub in here. I haven't gotten a good look, and I want to make sure there aren't a little bleeder or something I missed." So George scrubbed in, got the retractors, and by this time the anesthetist had him well relaxed, and I pulled the cecum well up into the wound, and there was a perfectly normal appendix laying back behind a cecum that wasn't visible before. Well, I'm running out of 15 minutes. Wow, thank you. At any rate, he'd said, "Now be sure and say some things I'll remember." Because he said, "I've read some articles that people don't lose their sense of hearing, even under an anesthetic," and they don't. Later, I used to give people suggestions during the operation about how good they're going to feel. And my major surgeons usually went home the day or the 1 or 2 days after surgery. And they would, if I did an 8 o'clock gallbladder, they'd be eating a general diet at noon. This type of thing. Never had any trouble. So we got the appendix up, and I said, "Well, I'll be darned. Perry, you've been passing yourself off as a fat Jew, and there's nothing kosher about you at all." So a couple days later, I hypnotized him, and he remembered everything that'd gone on. And he said, "You SOB, what do you mean I'm not kosher?" But he said, "What's a cecal diverticulum?" So I told him. And then he got an infection in all this fat. And I'd put a drain in the fat tissue, but fat tissue doesn't resist infection well. And so I took a couple stitches out, and he said, "Hypnotize me and tell me how to clear up the infection." So I hypnotized him, and I talked about the white blood cells moving into the area and eating up the bacteria, and the serum flooding into the wound and washing out the pus and everything. Well, by that night, he had serum everywhere. The bed was soaked. They had bath towels that were soaked. He'd stand up, and it would slop out on the floor a couple of ounces. And it's like a flood. So he said, "Hypnotize me and find out what's wrong." It was like the sorcerer's apprentice. There wasn't anything to stop it. So I hypnotized him, and I said, "Perry, what's with all the serum?" He said, "You told me to." I said, "Yeah, I did, but it's done its job now, and it can stop." Within 20 minutes, his wound was dry. His incision was stuck together the next day, and I sent him home, and he went on a 110-mile bike ride. So that's about all I got to say, except answer questions, if you've got any. Yes, ma'am. Well, I can't hear you very well, and I know they can't.
Is it true or...
Here.
Okay, now I got it. Is it true that you come back in pods, like 13 people or 20 people? Like, I know I've been with my husband.
Oh, you may.
You
if
may?
You choose to, sure.
But it's a choice. It's not
Choice.
a factual thing.
Everything's a choice.
Okay, second question is, are there some people that can't be hypnotized, and why would they not be able to be?
Well, Dolores says that anybody can be hypnotized. In my experience, whether they can't or won't, I've had patients that I couldn't even get eye closure. In my experience, they have to be deeply hypnotized in order to remember other lives. But she's had more experience with hypnosis than I have, and our experiences have been quite different from what she's searching for. See, things have a tendency to sort themselves out. When it became known by the universe that Dolores was interested in this subject, she drew people like flies to a pile of whatever. And and so she has all these people coming in. As a medical doctor, when it got around that I was using hypnosis, I got a lot of kooks. Oh, doc, hypnotize me so I can have sex all night. This was before Viagra. So I don't know, but I do know that they're pre-selected. So, but as to whether everybody can be hypnotized, I suppose so. And my hypnosis teacher said, you know, he'd find people that he couldn't hypnotize. So they'd come back repeatedly. And each time they got a little better. So, and a lot of times we're hypnotized and we don't know it. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask, is it possible that some things you're not supposed to remember through hypnosis? Because I'll explain one thing to you. I went to a meeting one time, and she told me that I had the tongue tore out of my head, and finally I was burned at the stake during the Inquisition. Now, I've been trying to get that in meditation. I've got other things through past lives, but not that one. Could you explain that, sir?
Well, maybe a couple things to answer. Maybe the person that told you that was wrong. The other thing is that maybe for some reason you're blocking it subconsciously, so you can't recall it. There's a number of explanations for something like that. I'm not sure. Yes, Marilyn?
OT, have you ever used hypnosis for anesthesia during surgery?
Oh, yeah. I did any number of minor surgeries. I hypnotized one woman for a delivery when she was in Hawaii. Her husband was in the grad school and came during the summer term to study, and then they went back to Hawaii. Well, she wanted to be hypnotized, and she was a great subject. So I think I hypnotized her 3 times. She had 3 visits with me. And I gave her a lot of suggestions that the minute her labor started, she'd relax. And as labor progressed, it would feel comfortable because she'd know that her baby was that closer to being here. And when the head began to press on the perineum, that it would become numb, just as if she'd had a spinal anesthetic and so forth. And every time the doctors or the nurses would mention to her anything about pain, she'd think it was funny and just giggle. Well, this was her first pregnancy, and I got a letter from her later. She had delivered almost a 9-pound baby, and the only anesthetic she got was some local when he did the episiotomy, not because she wanted it, because the doctor insisted on it. He said, well, this had got to hurt. She said she didn't even feel the needle when it stuck her. She was so numb. So she was motivated. She wanted it to work. She had every reason for it to work, so it worked. It was a post-hypnotic suggestion. And then I did some minor. I was going to operate on Perry Lyndon's appendix, and I jokingly said, well, let's use hypnosis for anesthesia. He said, okay, but what are you going to do to keep it from hurting? Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
How do you, these people that claim to contact the deceased, how do you reconcile that with this process of reincarnation? And the second question is, how would you be able to ever recognize someone that has come back, say a child or a baby?
Good questions. what they're doing when somebody channels somebody who's already dead. I have a friend that could channel anybody that ever lived, providing that individual didn't block it. But what you do is you channel that splinter that had been that individual. Because once the splinter reunites with the Oversoul, it doesn't lose its identity. It still maintains its own integrity, although it's part of the other. It's a paradox. It's part of it, but not part of it. Boy, my mind is going a mile a minute. What was your second question? Oh, yeah. What you do is you look at their metaphysical signature. Everybody's spirit looks different. You know, I look around here and everybody looks pretty much the same. You know, your heads are basically the same shape. You got a couple eyes in front, a nose mostly in front, ears, you know. But we don't have any trouble recognizing our friends from the crowd. So the same thing when you start looking at their spirit, the spirits are all recognizable. If they want to present themselves in some physical form, they meet somebody they knew in their caveman incarnation, they'll create an image, quote unquote, the same way you create your image now. You look like you look because the way you want it. So they would appear dressed in skins and maybe carrying a club or a spear. Somebody that knew you as a Zulu warrior, you'd appear to them in that way. I did an out-of-body and went up to see some guys in a UFO over Raton here a couple of years ago. And it was interesting because they don't have any physical body. There's pure spiritual. If they need a body, if they need a hand or something, they just zap one up. And it was sort of like living metal or plastic. But under ordinary circumstances, they don't have a body. And if they need a whole body, by their intent, they produce one. And they're shipped the same way. And it's interesting, they were very interested in communicating with us, but they couldn't. Not because of the language, but the way we construct our thoughts. They're so different that we don't have any common way to really communicate meaningfully. So they were up above Raton trying to create another dimension that would sort of be in between theirs and this one, so that there would be some common thoughts so that we could start developing a communication. Incidentally, they were from another galaxy. So they got here by just wanting to be here. Remember in the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull, where Jonathan is talking to the old gull, telling him how fast he could fly? And the old gull said, "No, Jonathan, fast is just being there." So they want to appear, they're here. They don't have to travel in some tedious form of locomotion. No, time's got to be up. No, I got 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to take it all. I drove here. It was easier than taking the plane, even though it was well over 700 miles. What? Well, my wife thinks this is a bunch of BS. To my knowledge, she hadn't even read my books. My wife is in the hospital with a broken hip. 9 days ago, we were crossing a parking lot, and a car backed into her, knocked her down, broke her hip. So I've spent the last 8-9 days this happened on a Thursday. I don't know what the date number was. in a car because she's in a hospital 110 miles from where I live. That's the closest orthopedic surgeon. It's up in Colorado. So it's a 4-hour trip up and back, and I've been going up to see her. And she's depressed and feeling sorry for herself. She wasn't in good shape anyway. She was walking with a cane and had the other hip was arthritic and bad, and she's physically weak. She spends most of her time doing computer games or lying down. And this may help her if she survives. I think she'll survive. She's through the worst part, but she's going to have to somehow suck it up, and she's been in a lot of pain. So I've been calling her at night to see what's happened. But anyway, thank you.